I mean, obviously, when you're thinking about the flood, you think of Genesis 6, 7, 8, and 9, where it talks about Noah. You got other passages in the Bible. What are some of those other passages? Where else does the Bible talk about the flood?
Well, that's a good insight, Jeff. It's not just Genesis that addresses the topic of the flood, and because people think it is only Genesis, they don't get the whole story. Psalms deals with it in 3 different places. You've got Job 38, Psalm 104. And the interesting thing about Job 38, Psalm 104, and Proverbs 8, they parallel the account of the 6 creation days you see in Genesis 1.
So they talk about creation as well, not just the flood.
Well, it talks about the flood tangentially. Let me explain.
Okay.
Because when you get into creation day 3, unlike what you see in Genesis 1, it tells us that once God transforms a planet from a water world to where you got oceans and continents coexisting.
Okay, so what's going on days 1, 2, and 3
Right.
in the Genesis 1 account?
That's the first part of creation, day 3, according
Right.
to Genesis 1. But what you see in Job 38 and Psalm 104 and Proverbs 8 is that these continents now become permanent barriers for the water. Let me give you an example. Psalm
Please.
104, verses 7 and 8 talk about how God establishes these continents that will be barriers to the oceans. And verse 9 says, once the continents are in place, quote, never again will water cover the whole face of the earth. Well,
So okay, if that's true, that seems very relevant to what the extent of the flood is then.
right. You know, people who claim that the flood is global, that it's responsible for all the world's geology, they're going to have a problem with Psalm 104, with Job 38, and with Proverbs 8, which tell us that, you know, once the continents are in place, they become permanent barriers for the water. The world will never again become a water world where water covers the whole surface of the earth.
Right. Go ahead.
And the other text I think it's important to go to is 2 Peter.
Yeah, I was wondering. So we've got Old Testament talking about Old Testament. What
Right.
do we see in the New Testament?
Well, in 2 Peter chapter 2, it talks about the world that was flooded, but it says the world of the ungodly was flooded. Now, in Greek, unlike
Wait, Genesis 1 or Genesis 6 says the whole world was ungodly at the time. Isn't that the whole world?
well, when it says, you know, like you actually have a word in the Greek, cosmos, which can mean the universe or the whole of the earth.
Okay.
But if it's qualified with an adjective, it becomes part of the earth. So what you notice here is that you got an adjective. The world of the ungodly was flooded. If Peter meant the entire globe was flooded, he wouldn't have qualified it.
Okay, so
And
that's
he does that again.
Yeah, that's consistent with what's going on there in Psalm 104. Then that there seems to be a boundary.
Right.
So, okay.
That's 2 Peter 2. 2 Peter 3, once again, Peter qualifies the world that was flooded. The Greek phrase is cosmos tote, and tote means at the time the event took place. So it's saying the world at the time the event took place was flooded. Now notice if you go back into Paul's writings in Romans, he talks about the faith of the Romans being heard throughout the whole world. He meant the Roman world, of course. And so what Peter is doing in 2 Peter 3 is contrasting the world of Rome with the world of Noah, neither of which refers to the entire planet. So the fact that Peter is choosing to qualify the word cosmos with 2 different adjectives in 2 different texts supports the conclusion we get from Psalms, Proverbs, and Job that this is a flood that wiped out all of humanity, wiped out the whole world of the ungodly, all the places where the ungodly dwelt. But I think it's quite clear there probably were not ungodly people inhabiting the South Pole. So no need for God to flood the South Pole or the Central Highlands of Greenland.
Well, the thing I find interesting about that is that, you know, if you're going to be a good Christian scholar, a good Christian theologian, you got to study what the scriptures have to say. And if we just say, oh, we're going to look in Genesis 6, 7, 8, and 9 for the flood account, we're missing a lot of what scripture has to say. We need to go look at everything scripture has to say to get a complete picture of creation, or a complete picture of what's going on in the flood and what God is doing there.
Well, I think a lot of English-speaking Christians don't realize the word Bible is a plural term. It's not referring to one book, but 66 books.
Right.
And one way you can more correctly interpret what the Bible is communicating to us is actually read through all 66 books on the topic that you're addressing. So it's not enough just to look at Genesis. We need to look at all the texts in all 66 books of the Bible that address the subject of the flood.
That sounds like really good advice.